declassified FISA memo. This one, the Democrats' version, and it is now at the White House. Good morning to you. I'm John Scott.
And I'm Julie Banderas, and good morning to you. The president with a big decision to make. And now that the House panel voted unanimously to release yet another memo, one that counters the recently released GOP memo that blasted the FBI in the Russia investigation. President Trump, meantime, saying that memo vindicated him. And now he has just 5 days to decide whether to allow the public to read the Democrats' version.
I think when you look at the first memo that was released and declassified, it clearly showed that there was serious concerns that were raised from these higher levels of the Department of Justice, in particular the FBI, showing political bias on using a dossier. It was a campaign opposition research memo that they used in order to give these FISA warrants. This was it's alarming.
Chief White House correspondent John Roberts is live with the story. He joins us live from the White House. All right, John, so now we're waiting.
Yeah, Julie, good morning. And we don't know how long we're going to have to wait, but it's going to be a matter of some days. That Democratic memo is here at the White House. It's 10 pages long versus 4 pages for the Republican FISA memo that was released on Friday. The White House counsel's office, the National Security Council, reviewing it to see if it's possible for it to be released. Sarah Huckabee Sanders in a statement earlier this morning saying, quote, "The White House has received a memorandum from the minority members of the House Select Permanent Committee on Intelligence. As stated many times, the administration will follow the same process and procedure with this memorandum from the minority as it did last week when it received the memorandum from the majority." This morning, the ranking member on the House Intelligence Committee, Adam Schiff, said he has concerns about what the White House might do to his memo in the coming days. Listen here.
What I'm more concerned about, Allison, is that they make political redactions. That is, not redactions to protect sources or methods, which we've asked the Department of Justice and FBI to do, but redactions to remove information they think is unfavorable to the president. That could be a real problem, and that's our main concern at this point.
So Schiff is saying that he is worried about the White House making political redactions. Well, sources who have read the Democratic memo tell Fox News that it is filled with sources and methods that would either need redacting or be caused to not allow the memo's release. Sources say that was done tactically to force the White House into either making changes or objecting to its release. Well, yesterday, outside Cincinnati, President Trump weighed in on the Republican memo that we mentioned was released last Friday. He didn't actually mention the memo specifically, but it was pretty clear what he was talking about. Listen here.
Oh, but did we catch them in the act or what? You know what I'm talking. Oh, did we catch them in the act? They are very embarrassed. They never thought they were going to get caught. We caught them.
So again, the clock ticking now. The White House has got 5 days to decide what to do with the Democratic memo, either object to its release or clear it for declassification. Today, in the 1 o'clock hour, the president is hosting a law enforcement roundtable on the notorious Hispanic gang MS-13. It's part of the effort to get an immigration deal through Congress. The president wants to trade protections for so-called dreamers. We've talked about this a lot, for enhanced border security, including a wall, an end to chain migration, and an end to the visa lottery program. The president, as part of that, weighing in on the death of Indianapolis Colts linebacker Edwin Jackson. He was killed over the weekend by a drunk driver, an illegal immigrant who had been deported twice but was still back in this country. The president tweeting, quote, "My prayers and best wishes are with the family of Edwin Jackson, a wonderful young man whose life was so senselessly taken." And then tweeting again, "So disgraceful that a person illegally in our country killed Colts linebacker Edwin Jackson. This is just one of many such preventable tragedies. We must get the Dems to get tough on the border and with illegal immigration fast." It looks, though, like reaching a deal on DACA isn't going to happen anytime soon. Talks have kind of stalled in Congress. The liaisons between the White House and Democrats in Congress not going as swimmingly as they were a couple of weeks ago. And that deadline looming, we are now less than a month away from the protections for so-called dreamers being eliminated, Julie. So the pressure will be on to try to get a deal here.
All right. Well, the president did indicate yesterday that he has no problem with this memo coming out, so it'll just be a matter of when.
Well, we'll see. He hadn't read it when he made those statements.
Yeah, that's true. You never know. All right. We'll look forward to that. John Roberts, thank you so much for reporting from the White House today. John.
So let's pick up on that. To Capitol Hill now, where lawmakers from both sides of the aisle are reacting to the Democrats' rebuttal to the GOP memo on the Russia investigation.
The vote was unanimous to release this. I think the Republican members understood that after calling for full transparency, they were getting hammered over the course of the week for trying to hide the minority response.
It was never an issue. We said all along we'd vote. I voted yes. That was unanimous vote. Totally phony issue. We said from day one it was going to be voted out.
Okay, so it shows transparency and everybody's clear?
Yeah, we said that all along. Absolutely, yeah.
They said that our memo came to all sorts of conclusions. Our memo didn't come to any conclusions. Our memo just listed facts. And their memo, people will see, they actually come to conclusions, and and have personal attacks on myself and Chairman Gowdy.
But the memo really distorted the state of the evidence and what was obtained through the FISA process, and so we wanted to provide a clear picture. Ours bolsters the credibility of the FBI.
Joining us now, Sagar Enjeti, White House correspondent for the Daily Caller. All right, so the House Intelligence Committee voted unanimously to release this Democrat memo. What happens now?
Right, so the White House has exactly 5 days in order to do a national security classification of this memo. And it's important to understand that this memo is substantially longer than the Republican counterpart. It's about 10 pages. And so also what we're hearing is that this memo it has a lot more national considerations, national security considerations that the FBI is going to have to take a long look at in terms of sources and methods and many of the other things that they are allowed to object to whenever it comes to declassification. It's also important to remember, though, that if Mr. Schiff and the Democrats feel that this memo was, quote, politically redacted, then they do have the power to bring this to a closed-door session of the House in order to vote that memo out and in order to override the president's declassification authority.
But why would Democrats want to do that? I mean, one of their complaints about the then imminent release of the Republican version of, well, the Republican memo, is that it was going to reveal sources and methods. If you're saying that your understanding is that this one goes into even more depth, why?
Well, I think that John Roberts hit it right on the head before me, which is the fact that the Democrats are very eager to have the president have to make some redactions here so that they can claim that there is a political motivation behind these. The fact of the matter is that, if we look back at the Republican memo, we heard so much about sources and methods, et cetera, et cetera. There was absolutely no national security implications to a fully unredacted version of the memo. And so there is quite a bit of political theater that goes into this. And we also have to understand this memo was constructed as a rebuttal to that of the Republicans. It was constructed specifically as a political document in order to have a rebuttal version to, quote unquote, give context. But it's also interesting here that much of the context goes into the minutia of, particular footnotes on whether the FISA application did in fact disclose that it was a political document or whether the FBI disclosed that. Yeah.
Because that's one of the big questions here. The Republican memo says that the FISA judge or judges was not told that the dossier was politically motivated, was paid for by the Clinton campaign and the Democratic National Committee. Now, it's our understanding that the Democrats are going to say, oh, but the judge could have read between the lines and he would have figured that out quite easily.
Mm-hmm. Right. I mean, we have no idea how long this FISA application is because it hasn't been released. As I understand it, these things can run into several hundred pages. So the idea that the FBI did not mention that to the judge, but included a mere footnote in a several hundred-page document and expected that to be, disclosure to the court. Now, perhaps in the letter of the law that's technically true, but in terms of the political ramifications of this FISA application on an American citizen using politically motivated opposition research, it does raise some questions here.
What about the fact that Glenn Simpson of Fusion GPS was meeting with Bruce Orr, a top Justice Department official and a guy whose wife worked for Glenn Simpson?
Right, exactly. And that's one thing that we never hear about in the Democratic rebuttal memo, and that's simply because there doesn't seem to be much rebuttal here. Bruce Orr met with Glenn Simpson before the investigation in the FISA application on Carter Page. After the investigation, he had a relationship with Christopher Steele. He had a meeting with Christopher Steele. Glenn Simpson, the man who helped compile this memo with Christopher Steele, employed Mr. Orr's wife. Now, What sources close to Orr's wife have said is that she was not involved in this investigation whatsoever, or the dossier's composition. But, you know, some of us have a few more questions for Mrs. Orr on that subject.
Yeah, because she was considered a Russia expert and in a fairly small firm. Kind of interesting. All right, Sagar, thanks very much. Sagar Enjeti from the...
Thanks for having me, John.
You bet. Thank you. Daily Caller.
What a wild ride it was on Wall Street. The Dow taking a record-setting dip yesterday before rebounding, then dropping again to end the day down more than 1,100 points. That is the biggest point loss ever. The volatility continues this morning with another roller coaster market. And Fox Business Network's Lauren Simonetti is live in New York City. Hey, Lauren, so how's it looking right now?
Well, the market's been open for an hour and a half, Julie. We've been down almost 570 points and up almost 370 points. So you basically have a 1,000 point swing from the high to the low of the session. This is complete whiplash for investors. And it could make playing this market, or quite frankly, even staying in it, daunting for so many people. This is when the financial advisors, their phones are off the hook. What do we do? What do we do? Let me give you some perspective. What we have seen consistently since the election of President Trump is that a market has gone straight up from 18,000 to 26,000 on the Dow in just over a year's time. So now that volatility is making a pretty big comeback, and pretty suddenly, investors are saying, why now? Well, we have higher interest rates. That is spooking investors, no doubt. The Federal Reserve likely to continue to raise rates as long as the economy gets better. But isn't an economy getting better good news? They can handle the higher cost of borrowing, for instance. Yeah, look at this latest data. The job market, stronger. Wages have gone up 2.9% in the past year. That's the most in 8 years. People are making money, companies are making money thanks to tax cuts and a pretty strong earnings season. Expected growth for the fourth quarter of 13%. Here's the obstacle right now. Investors are saying, how do I readjust to the new normal, the new reality? I do want to point out, yes, the Dow and the S&P 500, they've given up their gains so far this year, and all of this can change because the market is gyrating so much. The NASDAQ is still positive, and so are many of its very popular stocks that we use their products every day, Apple, Netflix, and Amazon, to name a few. So, you know, strap in, wild ride ahead, make up a number, because at some point today, we'll likely hit it, Julie.
All right, Lauren, thank you so much.
Sure.
John.
So, will he or won't he? The question of the day. President Trump trying now to decide whether he will allow the release of the Democratic memo countering the Republican memo that accused the FBI of abusing its surveillance powers. Our next guest, a Republican lawmaker, says the Democratic document should be made public. Plus, a Colorado deputy is killed on the job. How this case is adding to a disturbing trend in that state.
Just goes to show you how dangerous the job is, and that there's a lot of brave men and women who go out there every day and do it.
A Colorado deputy is shot and killed in the line of duty, making him the third deputy killed in that state since New Year's Eve. 34-year-old Deputy Micah Flick was shot yesterday while investigating a stolen car in Colorado Springs, about 70 miles south of Denver. A police officer, 2 deputies, and a bystander also shot. The suspect was shot and died at the scene. Yesterday marked Flick's 11th anniversary with the El Paso County Sheriff's Department, and hundreds of people lined the streets last night to salute the fallen hero.
So President Trump now has in his hands a second classified memo dealing with accusations of surveillance abuse in the FBI. Now, the House Intelligence Committee voting yesterday to release the Democratic rebuttal to the Republican memo, which alleged FBI senior officials used the anti-Trump dossier to secure a warrant to spy on a former Trump campaign advisor. Well, it is now up to the president to decide if the Democratic memo will be made public.
What we are going to learn when the Democratic, if and when, and we certainly hope that it is, the Democratic memo is released, which is a sort of counterpoint to the Republican memo, what we will learn is that it is not true that this FISA warrant was awarded solely on the basis of the Steele dossier.
We saved the Democrats from some hypocrisy here because Adam Schiff was making the case that we should not release our memo unless it was vetted. It had been vetted. And so then they wanted to immediately release theirs without it being vetted, and that's why I voted against it.
Joining now is Congressman Doug Collins of Georgia, Vice Chair of the House Republican Conference and member of the House Judiciary Committee. Thank you very much, sir, for talking to us this morning.
Good to be with you.
So Democrats are saying the FISA warrant wasn't awarded solely on the basis of the Steele dossier. They haven't proven that. So what other credible intel did they have, in fact, to obtain that warrant if it wasn't just Christopher Steele's anti-Trump dossier then?
Well, I think that's the point that they're trying to obfuscate on for a while now, and I think this is the issue, the interesting issue, is they put forth in their memo, and they're trying to do something that, frankly, they've been fighting now for the last year. It is the Democrats on the Intelligence Committee that have been lacking transparency, not wanting to see the subpoenas, not wanting to see the documents here, and as they've been going on, and now they're coming back and saying, well, it wasn't the only thing. Well, it was the lead, it was one of the main prominent pieces in their argument before the FISA court. I think when you look at it from that perspective is, if it was not so important, then why didn't you just leave it out? If it wasn't important enough to keep in, why would you include it? The reason they included it is because it was a made part, and that's just what the Democrats just don't want to deal with when you're dealing with a tainted information that actually was paid for through DNC and Clinton campaign. These are the kind of things that the bias that was being evident, they don't want to bring forward, and they're trying to do everything to just sort of shift attention from that.
Well, Devin Nunes has said that the GOP memo was phase one of the process to release information on government surveillance abuses, and the Democratic memo is phase two. So then what more are we going to learn in the Democrats' counter memo if, in fact, it wasn't an abuse of the FISA court?
Well, I think what we have seen so far is that there is enough questions coming into account, and when you're looking at the information given to the FISA court and the lack of transparency or the lack of forthrightness on those presenting the application to say that there was not bias by the, especially in the Steele dossier, to say that there is an agenda being perpetrated here. Only about 18 days if you go back before the actual election. These are the kind of things that I think need to come out and continue to be vetted because I think the American people need to know. Remember, the FISA court and system itself came out of intelligence abuses in the 70s. This is where this actually came from. And Congress is simply doing what Congress is supposed to do, and that is provide oversight. So I'm not sure what the Democrats are upset about.
Yeah, I mean, they want the Republicans to vet their memo, and then yet they don't want to vet their memo. Yesterday, Adam Schiff said Democrats want to make sure the White House does not redact our memo for political purposes. But then on the same day, the president, during a speech in Ohio, celebrated the release of the GOP memo, boasting on how the Democrats were caught in the act. So if the president is open to releasing the counter memo, then what in the world is Schiff even talking about?
Maybe running for another office. I'm not sure. I mean, the problem here is Schiff has always been, the past year, if you look at it, been always running interference on not wanting to get some of this subpoena, not wanting to investigate this, not wanting having this released. And I think what we're continuing to see here is we need the transparency because it is Congress's role. I mean, there was a senator, I think Senator Durbin actually said this presents a constitutional crisis. When is oversight by the Congress a constitutional crisis? When it's actually our job to be looking at this and protecting the rights of the American citizens. So when we put this forward, people are going to be able to see that we're doing our job, that we're holding those accountable to do what we're supposed to be doing.
Congressman Doug Collins, thank you very much. Appreciate you coming on.
It's good to be with you. Take care.
You too. John.
Still ahead, the National Transportation Safety Board releases new information about a deadly Amtrak train collision in South Carolina over the weekend. What we're learning about the moments before that crash, just ahead. And what really happened to Natalie Wood, why investigators are taking a closer look at her husband nearly 40 years after her death.
The version of events he's portrayed in the media, I think we told us the original investigators and we portrayed since then really don't add up to what we found.
Right now, the National Transportation Safety Board is examining the data recorder from the Amtrak train involved in that deadly crash in South Carolina over the weekend, with NTSB Chairman Robert Sumwalt saying they recovered it undamaged and were able to successfully download the information.
7 seconds before the end of the recording, the train horn was activated for 3 seconds. At that time, the speed was 56 miles per hour, and as we said yesterday, the allowable track speed was 59 miles per hour.
The train's engineer and conductor were killed in that crash. More than 100 people were injured when the passenger train ran onto a sidetrack and slammed into a parked, unoccupied freight train.
A last-ditch effort to find out what really happened in the drowning death of actress Natalie Wood. Investigators say her death nearly 4 decades ago is suspicious. William Lajeunesse is live in Los Angeles with the very latest on this one. Hi, John. William, sorry.
Well, Julie, evidence points to husband Robert Wagner, but police say he is a person of interest, not a suspect. Let me explain why police say his story, quote, doesn't add up. Natalie Wood did not know how to swim and always talked about her fear of the water. Yet Thanksgiving weekend, 1981, witnesses say they heard Wagner and Wood arguing on the yacht in Catalina Harbor. Wagner told police that Natalie took a dinghy into town and disappeared. Though police say she did not know how to drive or start the dinghy, no one heard it start, and she only left in a nightgown and socks in a rainstorm and rough sea. Hours later, police found her dead, floating about a mile away. Now, an autopsy showed bruises on her forearm, wrist, and knee, scratches on her neck and forehead, but the coroner called it an accidental drowning and did not check her fingernails for paint or flesh. Wagner says she must have slipped and hit her head getting into the dinghy, but once missing, the boat's captain said that Wagner wanted to go topside and go drinking rather than look for his wife.
When Laverne suggests, hey, we should turn on the light to look for her, he says, no. Instead of saying, yeah, let's look for her, no, turn the light on. Well, he says we should call somebody. No, let's wait. And he's on a boat himself. He can unhook his own boat and go look for her. He doesn't even do that.
Wagner turns 88 this week. His attorney claims he is innocent, but now refuses to answer questions from police.
We want to talk to Robert Wagner, you bet. We'd love to hear his side of his version of events. The version of events he's portrayed in the media, I think we told the original investigators and we portrayed since then really don't add up to what we found.
So accident or murder? Police claim they don't know or they don't have the evidence to prove either one. Yesterday's news conference was their last shot at finding a new witness 37 years later. Julie, back to you.
William Lajeunesse reporting from Los Angeles. Thank you.
And still ahead, a huge vote on Capitol Hill today. Can lawmakers gain any footing on immigration that will help them avoid shutting down the government? Plus, WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange back in the headlines. Could his time confined to Ecuador's embassy in London be coming to an end?
A British judge making a ruling this morning on whether or not to scrap the arrest warrant for WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange. Well, basically, the move would ultimately free him to leave the Ecuadorian embassy in London. Greg Palcott is reporting live in London with more. Hi, Greg.
Hi, Julie. We've been tracking that court proceeding. It is still going on, but it seems that WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange will still have to face at least some music. Remember, he faced a rape charge in Sweden back in 2010. He came to the UK shortly after that, was arrested here, faced extradition, and then jumped bail in 2012. And since then, he's been holed up in the Ecuadorian embassy here. And since then, the investigation has ended in Sweden, basically because it's been dragging on so long, and that's the basis of his lawyer's argument today. But the UK judge so far has not been moved, saying that jumping bail is a stand-alone offense. And just to make things a little more complicated, Julie, even if the court had ruled in Assange's favor today, there was no guarantee that he would have stepped out of his self-imposed prison. He's always feared and warned that the U.S. might try to extradite him for leaking vital intelligence information, including about the Iraq War. And in fact, in the past year, the Trump administration has expressed some interest in that. Again, we're awaiting the final results today of the court proceeding. It might be that Julian Assange would be tried in absentia on jumping bail, but for now, at least, all we know is that he's staying put. Back to you.
All right, Greg Palcott, thank you. John.
A bipartisan deal to help the so-called Dreamers struggles to gain footing in Congress as lawmakers today vote on short-term funding to keep the government open past this coming Friday. Immigration is key to the vote, but the proposal stops short on President Trump's primary demand.
I have to give it to Senator Coons and McCain. Congratulations, because it takes a special kind of person to write a bill that is worse than Graham Durbin. They did it. It is incredible. You have to have a border wall in a security package.
That's Hogan Gidley, a spokesman for the president. Joining us now, Josh Holmes, former chief of staff to Senator Mitch McConnell, and Jim Kessler, former legislative and policy director to Senator Chuck Schumer and co-founder of Third Way. Thanks, both of you, for being here. Jim,
thanks, John.
I'm going to start with you. The president has offered essentially amnesty to 1.8 million people. He has angered many people on his own base in the process. What more do Democrats want him to do?
Well, I think we got to be honest that Donald Trump doesn't really want to deal on immigration. I'm not saying this to cast blame on Donald Trump. There's always been kind of the tale of two Trumps on this. He came very, very close to a deal with Pelosi and Schumer and Durbin and Graham, and then he backed away. And, you know, there's a nativist side to him, the one that spent 5 minutes talking about MS-13 at the State of the Union and half a sentence talking about Russia. And this nativist Trump has taken over, and he doesn't really want a deal. I think these are false steps that he's putting forward right now, just to make it seem like he wants a deal. But there's no deal forthcoming. He doesn't want it to happen.
Well, I'm not sure, Josh, if anybody in Congress wants it to happen. The president has given them 7 months to come up with some kind of language. I mean, Congress is supposed to write the laws, after all. And here, you know, we're coming up on the deadline, and nothing has happened.
Well, what my good friend Jim is ignoring here is we're not even 2 weeks removed from the White House, President Trump releasing a pretty critical step in bringing together two sides here with a proposal that not only provides protections for DACA recipients and their immediate family, but also provides border security funding and much needed reforms to the chain migration system. This is not only a reasonable deal, it's one that I think anybody who's been following this topic for any period of time knows that that's where it has to land in order to actually get it done. So I think the president's in the right spot here. Who's not in the right spot, there seems to be an awful lot of confusion by members of Congress that are introducing their own quote-unquote bipartisan plans. Look, all the plans in the world are irrelevant if they don't have the support of the President of the United States who signs this into law. And so that's where we are at this point. I don't think it's going to happen by the February 8th deadline for funding, but I do have some encouragement that we'll get there before March 5.
Well, speaking of the president, just since we began this newscast, he has been tweeting his thoughts on all of this, sort of rare mid-morning tweets for him. He writes, polling shows nearly 7 in 10 Americans support an immigration reform package that includes DACA, fully secures the border, ends chain migration, and cancels the visa lottery. If Democrats oppose this deal, they aren't serious about DACA. They just want open borders. I'll read one more to you in a second, Jim, but why don't you react to that one?
Okay, so if you want to have a deal, you can go 3 different ways. You can go small, you can go medium, and you can go large. But if you're going to go small on one end, you've got to go small on the other end. So the Democrats get something that they want, DACA, that's kind of small size, and then Democrats give on something that's relatively small, let's say the border wall. Trump is saying, I want everything, chain migration, an entire immigration package, and I will give you basically 15% of what you want just dealing with DACA. That's not really how deals are made. So that's why I feel this is phony. This is the Trump not wanting a deal that's coming out here.
Well, just so we're clear, just so we're clear here, what the president is specifically talking about is a pathway to citizenship for 1.8 million quote-unquote dreamers. That is not a little deal. That is a pretty significant deal.
That is 15% of the undocumented immigration problem, and he wants 100% of the solution on the security side for it.
So you've got to. That's not 100% of the security deal. There's plenty of more Republican wants and needs that are going to happen on the border security front. But look, if you just separate that and take the chain migration issue, the 1.8 quickly becomes 4 million if you don't deal with that. And all of a sudden, we're not dealing with 15% at all. We're dealing with like 60%. So look, this has to be addressed in a package. And as the president rightly pointed out, that's where the American people are as well.
That's where Democrats and Republicans were in 2013 when they passed a comprehensive immigration bill that the Freedom Caucus in the House killed that did all of those things. And if we could just put that bill on the table, we could sign it, and that dealt with chain migration and merit immigration and all of the illegal immigration problem. And we could do that again. But, you know, the president is trying to get, you're right, he's not trying to get 100% of the security wish list. He's trying to get 80% of the security wish list. DACA is 15% of the problem. You get 15% of the security solution on the other side. That's the way deals work.
Let me read
Hey, listen,
you that second.
Jim, he's got the pen, and the Republicans control the Congress. So you don't make up the rules if you're in the minority here.
You still need
gotta make some
60
deals.
votes. You still need 60 votes. So yes, maybe maybe it's not going to be 15% for 15%, but it's not going to be 15% for 80%.
All right, let me read you that second tweet from the president again, just in the last 20 minutes or so. He writes, "We need a 21st century merit-based immigration system. Chain migration and the visa lottery are outdated programs that hurt our economic and national security." Gentlemen, I guess we're going to have to leave it there. I'm getting the wrap from our producers, so we got you both equal time. Thanks
More
very
later.
much. Jim and Josh, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, John.
Thank you.
The face-off with North Korea, what the vice president is saying that he is willing to do to calm things down. Interesting. We'll take a look. Plus, mistaken identity causing problems for one employee with Hawaii's emergency agency. He is balking at being blamed for the false missile alert.
Well, overall, after the incident, the state EOC received a number of threatening calls in various natures, upset people threatening physical or bodily harm to the employees here.